When gasoline moves toward $5 a gallon, the story is not only about a refinery, it is about a commute that costs more. It is about school drop-offs, errands, appointments, deliveries, and weekly fill-ups taking up more of a household budget. That is why the trouble at BP's Whiting Refinery matters to drivers across the Midwest. Most families do not follow refinery operations in Northwest Indiana. They do not track refinery capacity, labor disputes, temporary workers, or wholesale gasoline markets. They see the result when pump prices move quickly. BP's Whiting Refinery is one of the most important fuel facilities in the region. Reuters described it as the largest refinery in the U.S. Midwest, with capacity of 440,000 barrels per day. It is a major supplier of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. The Indiana Department of Environmental Management describes the Whiting Refinery as BP's largest refinery in the world and the largest refinery in the Midwest. The agency says it can process around 440,000 barrels of crude oil every day, produces a wide range of liquid fuels, and produces 7% of all asphalt in the United States. Those numbers explain why one refinery can matter beyond one city. A facility of that size sits inside the daily economy of the Great Lakes region. It helps supply fuels used for commuting, freight, aviation, roadwork, and the movement of goods. When that refinery faces trouble, the consequences can move outward. The company is not the center of this story. The people at the end of the fuel system are the driver in Michigan, the family in Indiana, the small business that depends on deliveries, the worker who has to commute where the gasoline is $4 or nearly $5, and the household that cannot pause transportation costs when the market tightens. The warning signs around Whiting came in more than one form. One warning was labor-related. Reuters reported that BP locked out about 800 workers represented by the United Steelworkers Union. On March 19, 2026, after months of failed contract negotiations, Reuters said the refinery continued operating during the lockout after BP brought in temporary workers. By April 22, 2026, Reuters reported that the lockout had entered its second month and talks were still deadlocked. BP Whiting refinery manager Chris Delafranco said, "We are ready to resume bargaining." Reuters also reported that BP said approximately 65 positions would be affected under the company proposal. The union maintained that the proposal involved job cuts, wage reductions, and limits on bargaining rights. That labor dispute involved the same refinery, but it should not be confused with the later gasoline price spike. The verified research does not prove that the labor dispute caused the refinery outage. The careful conclusion is that the labor dispute and the outage were separate pressures around the same critical facility. The consumer impact became more visible in late April. Local reports and gas buddy analysis tied the Great Lakes gasoline price spike to an unplanned power outage at BP's refinery in Northwest Indiana. On April 29, 2026, WWMT and WPBN reported that Gas Buddy's head of petroleum analysis, Patrick DeHaan, said Great Lakes prices could jump 40 to 80 cents per gallon, potentially pushing some areas close to $5 per gallon. DeHaan tied the increase largely to refinery issues in the region, including an unplanned power outage at BP's refinery in Northwest Indiana. The warning was direct. Wholesale gasoline had already moved, and retail prices had not fully caught up, DeHaan said. The wholesale price of gasoline spiked Monday and again Tuesday, and retailers have not yet passed it along. Fuel pressure often reaches consumers in stages. The first move can happen in wholesale markets. Retail prices can follow with a delay. Drivers see the final stage, but the pressure begins earlier. According to the reporting, there is typically a 1 to 2 day delay before higher wholesale costs show up at the pump. That delay is the path from refinery trouble to household cost. A refinery outage reduces output. Reduced output tightens regional supply. Wholesale gasoline prices rise first. Retailers then pass along higher costs. Drivers face higher prices during commutes, errands, and weekly fill. On April 29, WTVB reported that the average price for gasoline in Michigan had soared to $4.79 per gallon. The report described it as the highest level since June 2022, when Michigan prices peaked at $5.22 per gallon. WTVB attributed the jump to Gas Buddy's analysis of the BP Whiting refinery going offline unexpectedly. It also reported that a power interruption at BP Whiting forced the facility offline and reduced gasoline output that normally supplies parts of Michigan, Indiana, and Illinois. That is the regional chain. A refinery in Northwest Indiana goes offline unexpectedly, gasoline output is reduced. The output normally supplies parts of Michigan, Indiana, and Illinois. Regional wholesale prices move higher. Retail prices follow. Drivers in multiple states pay more. For households, that is the economic consequence. A refinery problem does not stay inside the refinery. It becomes a higher pump price for someone driving to work. It becomes a larger receipt for a family filling a 15-gallon tank. It becomes less flexibility in a monthly budget already dealing with groceries, rent, utilities, insurance, and other fixed costs. Indiana felt the pressure quickly. On May 1, 2026, WWBL reported that Indiana's average gasoline price had climbed to $4.80 per gallon, about $1.10 higher than the previous week. The report said crude oil was part of the pressure, but the Whiting Refinery in northwest Indiana was also a major factor. WWBL described Whiting as the main supplier of gasoline in the Great Lakes region. That distinction matters. When a refinery described as a main regional supplier is disrupted, the market has less room to absorb the loss. The pressure was not uniform, but it was visible. WSBT reported on April 30, 2026, that the AAA average was $4.41 per gallon in Indiana and $4.58 per gallon in Michigan. Some stations were still around $4, while others were near $5. That range shows how refinery pressure can move unevenly. Local stations do not all change prices at the same moment. Some areas see the increase faster, others lag. The regional market direction becomes clear when wholesale prices rise and supply tightens. Michigan became the clearest consumer case study. On April 29, WTVB reported Michigan gasoline at $4.79 per gallon. By May 4, our Midland reported Michigan regular unleaded had risen to $4.87 per gallon. That was up 85 cents from the prior week, $1 higher than the prior month, and $1.65 higher than the same time the previous year. For a 15-gallon tank, our Midland reported drivers were paying about $73 to fill up. That was about $22 more than in August 2025. At that point, a refinery issue becomes household arithmetic. The increase is no longer an abstract market move. It becomes a fill-up cost, a higher weekly transportation bill, and a cost that repeats every time a family drives. Our Midland also reported that some Michigan locations were close to the $5 level. Benton Harbor averaged $4.94. Ann Arbor averaged $4.92. Grand Rapids averaged $4.91. Auburn had recently hit $4.99 per gallon. Michigan diesel prices also hit a new all-time high of $6.01 on May 4, 2026. That diesel detail matters because fuel pressure does not only affect personal driving. Diesel is tied to freight and goods movement. When diesel prices rise, the cost structure behind deliveries and transported goods can also face pressure. The Whiting story was unfolding inside a broader national gasoline market that was already tightening. AAA reported on April 30, 2026. That the national average for gasoline rose 27 cents in 1 week to $4.30 per gallon. AAA said prices were $1.12 higher than 1 year earlier and were the highest since late July 2022. AAA also cited EIA data showing gasoline demand increased from 9.05 million barrels per day to 9.10 million barrels per day. Total domestic gasoline supply fell from 228.4 million barrels to 222.3 million barrels. Gasoline production averaged 9.8 million barrels per day. That national context shows that the Midwest spike did not occur in a comfortable fuel market. Demand was rising. Domestic gasoline supply was falling. Prices were moving higher nationally. A major regional refinery problem then added local pressure in the Great Lakes region. The careful conclusion is not that Whiting alone caused every gasoline increase. The verified claim is narrower. The BP Whiting outage was a major regional factor in the Midwest spike, while broader national fuel conditions also contributed to a tighter price environment. Fuel prices are rarely driven by one factor alone. Crude oil matters, supply matters, demand matters, regional refinery output matters, wholesale markets matter, local retail timing matters. When a major refinery that supplies Michigan, Indiana, and Illinois has an unexpected outage, the local impact can be fast and visible. The labor dispute added a separate layer of pressure around the same facility. On May 13, 2026, Reuters reported that BP and United Steelworkers plan to resume contract negotiations the following Monday. BP said it looked forward to returning to the table to reach an agreement that preserved strong jobs, improved refinery performance, strengthened safety, and kept the site competitive. United Steelworkers Local 7-1 President Eric Schultz said the union would again ask BP to lift the lockout and move away from demands to cut more than 100 local jobs, make pay cuts, and reduce bargaining and seniority rights. BP's view and the union's view were different. BP said it wanted an agreement that preserved strong jobs while improving refinery performance, strengthening safety, and keeping the site competitive over the long term. Reuters also reported BP's position that roughly 65 positions would be affected under its proposal. The union argued that BP should end the lockout and move away from demands that the union said included more than 100 local job cuts, pay reductions, and reduced bargaining and seniority rights. Eric Schultz said, "We're pleased British Petroleum responded to our request to resume negotiating." In an earlier April Reuters report, Schultz said, "If they truly want to get back to the table, it's simple. End the lockout and be willing to seriously negotiate a fair contract," he added. "Our members have been ready to bargain. We remain ready to bargain. The company has the power to end this dispute today. The labor issue should be handled separately from the outage." The research does not verify that the lockout caused the power interruption. Both events show why a single refinery can become a point of regional economic concern. One side of the story is supply. The other side is labor and operational stability. For ordinary drivers, both are upstream. The family at the pump does not negotiate the contract, manage refinery staffing, or repair the power interruption. It sees the final cost when gasoline approaches $5. That is the human impact. A household budget is built around recurring expenses. Rent or mortgage payments repeat, utility bills repeat, grocery trips repeat, fuel purchases repeat. When gasoline rises sharply in 1 week, the cost does not have to be permanent to matter. It only has to arrive during a period when families still need to drive. A worker still needs to get to work. A parent still needs to take children to school. A household still needs groceries. A medical appointment still requires transportation. A small business still relies on deliveries. Higher gasoline prices do not stop normal life. They raise the cost of maintaining it. The BP Whiting issue shows how a regional fuel system can transmit industrial trouble into household pressure. The refinery problem is upstream. The wholesale price move is midstream. The pump price is downstream. The household budget is where the consequence lands. The timeline shows the escalation clearly. On March 19th, BP locked out about 800 workers represented by the United Steelworkers at the Whiting Refinery after contract talks failed. The refinery continued operating with temporary workers according to Reuters. On April 22nd, Reuters reported that the lockout had entered its second month and that talks remained stalled. Whiting was identified as the largest refinery in the Midwest and a major supplier of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. On April 29th, local reporting cited gas buddies warning that Great Lakes gasoline prices could jump 40 to 80 cents per gallon after an unplanned power outage at BP's Northwest Indiana refinery. That same day, Michigan's average gasoline price reached $4.79 per gallon. On April 30th, AAA reported the national average gasoline price had risen 27 cents in 1 week to $4.30 per gallon, while domestic gasoline supply fell from 228.4 million barrels to 222.3 million barrels. Also on April 30th, WSBT reported AAA averages of $4.41 in Indiana and $4.58 in Michigan, with some stations still around $4 and others near $5. On May 1st, Indiana's average gasoline price was reported at $4.80 per gallon, about $1.10 higher than the previous week. On May 4th, Michigan regular unleaded reached $4.87 per gallon, up 85 cents from a week earlier. Some local markets were near $5, and Michigan diesel reached $6.01. On May 13th, Reuters reported BP and the United Steelworkers would resume negotiations after the lockout at the 440,000 barrel per day Whiting refinery. That sequence shows accumulation rather than a single isolated headline. Labor tensions were already present. A refinery outage then reduced output. Wholesale prices moved first. Retail prices followed. State averages rose sharply. Some local stations approached $5. National supply was also tightening. For drivers, that sequence becomes a simpler reality. The fuel system had less slack, and the pump price rose. The consumer consequence is not speculative. The numbers show it. Michigan drivers were paying about $73 to fill a 15-gallon tank by May 4. That was about $22 more than in August 2025. Indiana's average was about $1.10 higher than the previous week. Michigan prices were up 85 cents in 1 week. Some local Michigan prices were already within a penny of $5 per gallon. That is household cash leaving faster at the pump. AAA spokesperson Adrienne Woodland said, Michigan drivers are feeling the squeeze as gas prices spike 85 cents in 1 week. Until oil prices ease and gasoline stocks rebuild, drivers may continue to feel pressure at the pump. That quote ties the driver impact to the broader supply picture. Oil prices and gasoline stocks matter, but the effect is measured at the pump. A single refinery problem can move quickly through a regional fuel market when that refinery is large, when it supplies multiple states, and when broader gasoline supply is already tightening. BP, the union, Gas Buddy, AAA, EIA, and local reporters all appear in the story because they document different parts of the chain. BP and United Steelworkers document the labor dispute. Local reports and Gas Buddy document the outage and wholesale pressure. AAA and EIA document the gasoline supply and price environment. The final issue is what happens to regular people. For a middle-class household, a price spike toward $5 per gallon can change weekly choices. It can reduce discretionary spending, make the commute more expensive, raise the cost of errands, and make routine trips more costly. The research does not prove a long-term shortage. It does not prove the lockout caused the outage. It does not show that every Midwest price increase came from Whiting alone. The verified story is narrower and stronger. BP Whiting is a 440,000 barrel per day refinery, the largest in the Midwest and a major supplier of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. It faced a labor dispute involving about 800 locked-out workers. It also had an unplanned power outage that local reports tied to reduced gasoline output. Great Lakes wholesale gasoline prices spiked before retail prices fully caught up. Michigan, Indiana, and local Midwest markets saw pump prices move sharply higher, with some locations near $5. That is how refinery trouble reaches drivers. The latest verified reporting showed BP and United Steelworkers scheduled to resume negotiations after May 13, 2026. About 800 workers had been locked out since March 19, and the refinery had continued operating with temporary workers. On the consumer side, Midwest drivers had already faced sharp increases. Michigan reached $4.79 on April 29, then $4.87 by May 4. Indiana reached $4.80 on May 1. Some Michigan locations were near $5, including Auburn at $4.99. The unresolved pressure is the relationship between a critical regional refinery and the drivers who depend on stable fuel supply. When Whiting has trouble, the issue does not remain inside the refinery gate. It can move through output, wholesale prices, station prices, and household budgets. For families, the name of the refinery may not matter. The size of the facility may not be something they follow. The price on the pump matters. The cost of a full tank matters. The extra money required for a weekly commute matters. BP Whiting shows how one refinery problem can become a regional consumer issue. A power interruption reduces output. Reduced output tightens supply. Wholesale prices move higher. Retail prices follow. Drivers pay more for the same miles. The refinery trouble begins far upstream. The impact ends with ordinary people deciding how to manage another higher cost in the budget.